Legendary beginning. The mystery of the Great Sphinx of Giza. Have you ever heard of an ancient structure known as the eighth wonder of the world? That is the Great Sphinx of Giza, a giant stone statue standing tall in the middle of the Egyptian desert. Shaped like a human head and a lion body. And above all, carrying within it a series of mysteries that no one has fully solved. Located next to the famous pyramids, the Sphinx is not only a work of art, but also a door that opens thousands of questions. Who built it? What was the purpose? And why does it look like part human, part animal? Through thousands of years, covered by layers of sand and dust, wars, and erosion, the Sphinx still stands there as a silent gatekeeper of history. Even conquering kings like Napoleon, when they came to Egypt, only saw the head emerging from the sand. It was not until the 20th century that the whole world saw its entire great body for the first time. And the strangest thing is, despite centuries of research, archaeologists still cannot agree on who is the father of the Sphinx. Such a magnificent structure, there is not a single inscription stating who created it. Is there anything hidden under the ancient stone? Let's explore it in this video. The journey to excavate the Sphinx, when history rises from the dust. Can you believe it? One of the greatest works of mankind, the famous Sphinx statue in Giza, was once buried alive under the sand for hundreds of years. It sounds like a joke, but it is true, and the story of its excavation is as thrilling as an adventure movie. Let's go back in time to 1798, when Napoleon Bonaparte led an expedition to Egypt. In that army, there were not only soldiers, but also scientists and archaeologists who followed to study this legendary civilization. But do you know what surprised them? In front of them was only the head of the Sphinx rising from the vast sand. The entire massive body was completely buried. At that time, no one knew that underneath that majestic head was a body nearly 73 meters long and 20 meters high, carved from a single block of limestone. It was not only a giant sculpture, but also a gateway to the mysterious treasure of ancient Egyptian civilization. For more than a century after that, many archaeologists and engineers tried to excavate, but most of them gave up because the sand kept coming back. It seemed that the Sphinx would only appear halfway forever, as if it wanted to keep some secret for itself. Then in the 1920s, a name appeared as a savior of history. Émile Barrès, a French engineer, working for the Egyptian Antiquities Council. Unlike his predecessors, Barrès was not discouraged by the thick layer of sand. He spent more than 10 years, yes, 10 years, excavating little by little around the Sphinx. Without modern excavators like today, Barrés's team had to work almost entirely by hand, shovel by shovel, layer by layer of sand. Can you imagine that patience? In the middle of the hot desert, the wind blew the sand blindly. There were days when they finished digging in the morning, and by the afternoon, the sand was covered again as if no one had ever dug. But it was that extraordinary perseverance that brought about amazing results. In 1936, the world was able to admire the entire majestic body of the Sphinx for the first time. The statue lay stretched out on the ground, gracefully like a giant beast guarding the sacred land for thousands of years. People say that the Sphinx is like a living memory, and Émile Barrès is the one who awakened that memory. If it weren't for him, perhaps until now we would only know of a lost head in the desert. And you know, to this day, many people believe that around or below the Sphinx there are still secret rooms, ancient documents that have never been revealed. The question is, what does the Sphinx want to hide? Or is history waiting for someone patient and passionate enough like Barrès to continue exploring? If one day you stand in front of the Sphinx of Giza, you will feel like you are just a small grain of sand in the vast desert. Not because the Egyptian air is too hot or because you are too small, but because of the unimaginable greatness of this ancient stone statue. Just imagine a statue up to 73 meters long, 20 meters high, equivalent to a 6-story building, and nearly 19 meters wide. But what makes the Sphinx different from any other construction of its time is that it is carved entirely from a single block of stone. Not pieced together, not built on top of bricks. A giant block of stone was carefully carved to create the powerful and mysterious shape of the Sphinx. Do you think this is impressive? Wait, remember that the statue was built at a time when humans did not have machines, cranes, laser cutting technology, or heavy transport vehicles. Yet the ancient Egyptians used primitive tools, stone hammers, bronze chisels, to carve a block of stone nearly the length of a football field. Sounds creepy, right? But not only is the Sphinx huge, it is also extremely delicately carved. From its cold, seemingly expressive eyes to the soft curves along its body, all demonstrate the pinnacle of craftsmanship. Many researchers say that this level of technique far exceeds the era in which the Sphinx is believed to have been created, around 2500 BC. This raises a big question. Is the Sphinx even older than the pyramids? And if so, who created it? Another interesting point is that after thousands of years of exposure to the sun, wind, sand, dust and rain, especially ancient rain from the time when the Egyptian desert was still green, the body of the Sphinx has been eroded quite a bit. Limestone, which is a relatively soft stone, could not retain its original shape. Therefore, during the restoration process, experts had to add new blocks of stone to the body of the statue to keep it from collapsing. If you look closely, you can see that the body and legs of the Sphinx have many patchwork sections made of stone, with colors slightly different from the original. These are the scars left by time, like the way humans patch up memories to preserve history. There are also theories that, because of its unusual size and material, the Sphinx could not have been created by ancient Egyptians. Some non-mainstream scholars have hypothesized that the Sphinx is the legacy of a lost civilization, even related to extraterrestrial beings. It sounds like a science fiction movie, but think about it. If we discovered a similar structure in an uninhabited place today, would you believe that it was created by modern humans? The Sphinx is not just a huge statue. It is a testament to the extraordinary abilities of ancient humans, or even evidence of things beyond common understanding. And every time you look at it, you see not just a block of stone, but a whole chapter of living history written by hands. Wisdom and mystery spanning millennia. Who really built the Great Sphinx of Giza? One of the questions that makes archaeologists and history enthusiasts headache the most is, who built the Great Sphinx of Giza? A giant, magnificent structure that is beyond imagination. Yet, there is not a single clear note about the identity of its creator. According to the popular hypothesis in textbooks and official documents, the Sphinx was built around 2500 BC, during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre, one of the kings of the 4th dynasty of ancient Egypt. The reason? There is a stone stele placed between the two front legs of the statue, called the Dream Stele, on which Khafre's name is engraved. In addition, many scholars believe that the Sphinx's face bears a resemblance to the portrait of this pharaoh. Sounds reasonable, right? But it's not that simple. The stele doesn't claim that Khafre built the statue. It only mentions that he renovated or replaced an existing statue. It's like moving into an old house, repainting the walls, adding a sign, but that doesn't mean you built the whole house. This ambiguity has opened up a series of different hypotheses, from historical doubts to ideas that sound like science fiction. Hypothesis number 1. A lost prehistoric civilization? Some scholars and researchers like John Anthony West or Graham Hancock believe that the Sphinx was built tens of thousands of years ago, during the period called Zep Tepi, or the beginning in Egyptian mythology, when the gods walked among men. They believe that this is the work of a lost civilization, possibly even more advanced than ancient Egypt later on. Hypothesis 2. The Sphinx, an alien construction? Another bold hypothesis comes from non-traditional researchers. The Sphinx was built with alien technology. They argue that the level of technology to carve a giant limestone block with such precision, something that the civilization of that time was not capable of doing. Of course, this hypothesis was strongly rejected by the scientific community, but it attracted millions of mystery enthusiasts around the world. Hypothesis 3. The Sphinx doesn't even have a human face. Some researchers believe that the face of the statue was not a human face from the beginning, but could be a lion's face, symbolizing the constellation Leo. Some even suggest that the statue was originally the god Anubis, with a dog's head, but was later carved into a human face. So who is right? The truth is, we still don't know for sure. The evidence is still vague, and the theories are growing. The Sphinx is like a timekeeper, standing tall in the desert to challenge all those who try to decipher the past. If you have studied history, you have probably heard that the Great Sphinx of Giza was built around 2500 BC, under the Pharaoh Khafre. But what if I told you that the Sphinx could have been standing for 10.000, even 12.000 years? A number that would have the entire archaeological community arguing until they were hoarse. The story began when a geologist named Robert Schoch, who did not have an archaeology background, came to Egypt to study the Sphinx. And at first glance, he realized that something was wrong. You know, Egypt is now a dry desert, but on the body of the Sphinx, especially the body and the surrounding stone pedestal, there are vertical undulations, which do not look at all like the type of erosion caused by wind and sand that is common in deserts. Schoch, with the eye of a geologist, immediately recognized this was a trace of rainwater, something that could only appear in a humid climate, with rain lasting for centuries, even millennia. And so the rain erosion theory was born. He and researcher John Anthony West put forward a bold hypothesis. The Sphinx must have been built during the time when Egypt was still green. That is, at least 7.000 to 12.000 years ago, when the climate here was as humid as the delta. If Schoch's hypothesis is correct, the Sphinx is more ancient than all the pyramids, possibly even created before the ancient Egyptian civilization we know. It is like a fragment of time left over from a civilization that has disappeared in human history. Schoch even points out that this type of rainwater erosion could not have occurred in the last 4.000 to 5.000 years, because the weather in the Giza area has been dry for a long time. So, what kind of rains created those traces? Could it have been rain from prehistoric times? Of course, Schoch and West's theory is not enthusiastically supported by traditional archaeologists. Many believe that it is just a coincidence, or due to natural weathering. Others argue that if there really was a civilization that built the Sphinx before ancient Egypt, then why are there no other traces? But there are also people starting to question, if it wasn't Khafre, then who built the statue? And if the statue is really more than 10.000 years old, then the Sphinx is not just an architectural work. It is evidence of a past we have never known. What do you think? Is the Sphinx a masterpiece of ancient Egypt or a remnant of a lost civilization? Are those erosion marks scientific evidence, or just speculation? And if someone did build the Sphinx in prehistoric times, then who were they? The lost twins, the mystery of the second Sphinx in the Giza desert. Have you ever wondered, is the Sphinx of Giza, the magnificent work of ancient Egypt, really only one? Sounds strange, right? We are all familiar with the image of the lone Sphinx guarding the Giza plateau, facing the rising sun, towering in the vast desert for thousands of years. But there is a surprising hypothesis that many researchers are interested in. It is very possible that the Sphinx originally had a twin brother standing next to it. Some ancient Greek and Arabic records mention images of two sphinxes facing each other or parallel to each other. In ancient Egyptian culture, the concept of twins, or balance, was considered a sacred symbol, representing the order of the universe. Light and dark, the rising and setting sun, male and female. So, if there were two sphinxes, one would face east, as the current one does, while the other could face west, symbolizing the closing of the cycle. This is completely consistent with ancient Egyptian beliefs. Researchers Jerry Cannon and Malcolm Hutton have caused a stir by hypothesizing that the second sphinx may still be buried under thick layers of sand, yet to be excavated. They based their findings on ancient descriptions, satellite images, geological studies of the Giza area, as well as the unusual symmetry in the ancient architecture surrounding the current sphinx. Not only that, they also emphasize that if the ancient Egyptians really worshipped ballads, then it would be unreasonable to build only one statue. And with the amount of sand as thick as the Giza Plateau, it is entirely possible that a large structure would be buried for thousands of years. Don't forget, the current sphinx itself was mostly buried until the 20th century. Although the idea of a second sphinx is appealing, traditional archaeologists are skeptical. They say there is no specific physical evidence such as carved stones, foundations or clear relics to show that another statue once existed. Satellite images are only guesses about the terrain, not enough to confirm anything for sure. However, independent researchers have not given up. They have called for further seismic surveys, ground-penetrating radar, GPR, and especially careful excavations in suspected locations, where the twin sphinxes may be quietly sleeping under the sand, waiting to be awakened. Have you ever imagined that, right below the feet of the Egyptian sphinx, a magnificent stone structure that has existed for more than 4,000 years, there could be an ancient archive room? Not an ordinary archive room, but the legendary knowledge of Atlantis, a mysterious civilization that is said to have disappeared after a global catastrophe. It sounds like science fiction, but there are many people who believe that this is completely true. And the person who initiated this hypothesis is none other than Edgar Cayce, an American prophet famous for thousands of shocking predictions. During his many, deep sleeps, to access what he called the realm of cosmic knowledge, Cayce predicted that under the Sphinx there was a secret chamber, built during the time of Atlantis. He called it the Hall of Records, the place where the entire history of mankind, maps of the stars, and forgotten knowledge from prehistoric times were stored. According to Cayce, this chamber contained texts engraved on stone tablets, manuscripts, and even mysterious tools used to look up ancient knowledge. He also emphasized that the survivors of the Atlantis disaster migrated to Egypt, then buried this treasure of knowledge at Giza, so that future generations could discover it when humanity was ready. This prophecy is believed by many followers of the mystical school. But is there any evidence to support it? In the mid-1990s, a team of researchers led by Joe Jehoda and Dr. Joseph Shore conducted a seismic survey of the area around the Sphinx. They discovered a large rectangular void just below the front feet of the statue, exactly as Cayce had described nearly 60 years earlier. The remarkable thing is, the void showed no signs of being naturally formed, most likely a purpose-built structure. The researchers immediately asked the Egyptian authorities for permission to excavate, but were denied. To this day, no one has been allowed to dig deeper or survey the area. That only adds to the mystery. People began to ask, who is deliberately hiding something? Some believe that the authorities are afraid of destroying a sacred site. Others suspect that Egypt may have found something, but is not yet willing to announce it. Many people also believe that if the record room were real, it would shake up the entire history of humanity as we know it. Although there is no hard evidence to prove that the chamber exists, the coincidence between Cayce's prophecy and geological survey data cannot be ignored. The Great Sphinx of Giza, with its lion-human body, has long been an immortal symbol of ancient Egyptian civilization. According to most archaeologists, this giant statue was built around 2500 BC, during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre. However, a shocking hypothesis from geologist Robert Schoch has shocked the world. He believes that the Sphinx is not simply a 4.500-year-old structure, but may actually have been built between 10.000 and 12.000 years ago, nearly 3 times the officially recorded age. What prompted Schoch to make this bold statement was the special erosion marks on the statue's body and stone base. Upon closer inspection, he realized that these were not traces of sand and wind as in today's arid desert environment, but traces of erosion from rainwater, something that Egypt has not had in recent millennia. In other words, these traces could only have formed in humid climate conditions, when there had been continuous rain showers for centuries, that is. The Sphinx must have existed when the Giza desert was still green. Imagine this as if you lived in the same house with your grandparents. Both were human, living in the same place, sharing the same space, but their life experiences, memories and understanding were far beyond yours. They had witnessed wars, changes in life, events that you had only heard about from adults. And now imagine the Sphinx as such an ancestor, a living witness to prehistoric times, witnessing the rise and fall of civilizations, welcoming the sunlight when humans were still foragers. Schoch's hypothesis, while controversial, has been supported by a number of independent researchers, especially when they compare it with a lot of geological, climatological, and archaeological data that has not been widely recognized. However, most traditional archaeologists still strongly disagree. They believe that the Sphinx is so old that it is absurd, that there is no convincing evidence of the existence of a civilization with the technology to carve such a structure 12.000 years ago. However, they also cannot explain why there are rain erosion marks in a land that has not rained for thousands of years. This silence makes people even more curious. If Schoch's hypothesis is correct, then the Sphinx is not simply a magnificent sculpture, but a living fragment of a buried civilization, the only remaining physical evidence from an era that has never been recorded in history. It makes us ask all the questions about the origin of human intelligence, about the capabilities of ancient communities, and especially, is the history we learn in books missing its biggest chapter? Although there is no final proof, the hypothesis about the true age of the Sphinx has opened a new door, not only for archaeology, but also for the imagination of all mankind. And while researchers are still arguing, the Sphinx still lies there, silently looking towards the rising sun, as if challenging us to find the truth it has kept for millennia. But behind that solid and mysterious appearance are countless unanswered questions. When was the statue built? Who created it? And what was its real purpose? According to official history, the Sphinx was built around 2500 BC, during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre. This hypothesis is based on the discovery of the dream stele between the statue's front legs, on which Khafre's name is engraved. Many archaeologists believe that the statue's face bears a resemblance to the pharaoh's portrait. However, it is worth noting that the stele only records the restoration or recognition of the statue, but does not mention its original creator at all. That has led some scholars and independent researchers to begin to doubt, was Khafre really the one who directed the construction? Or did he just inherit a legacy that existed long before? One of the most shocking hypotheses comes from geologist Robert Schoch, when he carefully observed the body of the statue and the surrounding stone pedestal. He discovered erosion that did not resemble the effects of wind and sand, which are characteristic of desert climates, but rather the traces of long-term rainwater. And he came to a bold conclusion. The Sphinx could have been built 10.000 to 12.000 years ago. That is, at a time when the Giza area was still a wet, rainy land. If that were true, the Sphinx would no longer be a product of the ancient Egyptians, but a relic of a vanished civilization, perhaps even the predecessor of the legendary Atlantis. The mystery of the Sphinx also extends to the question of its purpose. If it was only to honor the power of the pharaoh, why is there no specific inscription? Why was a half-human, half-animal statue chosen? with a physique that clearly does not resemble any pharaoh? Some scholars believe that the statue has a deep spiritual meaning, related to the myth of Zep Tepi, a time when gods were said to have walked among men. And if that is true, the Sphinx could be a sacred landmark marking the place between humans and gods. Not only that, many modern seismic surveys have discovered a rectangular void beneath the base of the statue, which could be a man-made chamber that has never been excavated. Some believe that this is the Chamber of Records, the place where lost knowledge from the time of Atlantis is kept, as prophesied by the prophet Edgar Cayce. And then there is the theory that a second Sphinx once stood parallel or opposite the current one, but to this day remains buried under deep layers of sand. All of this, from the statue's true age, the identity of its creator, the reason for its construction, to the chambers that have yet to be unlocked, remains an open question. It seems that the Sphinx, for thousands of years, has remained silent in the desert like a guardian of time, ready to reveal its secrets, but only if humanity is patient and awake enough to listen. If you like this content, don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next videos.